Great. Okay, well, welcome everyone. My name is Margaret Walton Roberts. I'm a professor in the Geography and Environmental Studies Department at Wilfrid Laurier University. I'm also a member of the International Migration. I'm one of the committee members with the Local Immigration Partnership here in Waterloo region. And I was also on the data committee. I think that was part of this survey. So I'm very excited to hear the results. And so thank you for joining us. Next slide, Dan, before we get started, I'd like to just make a land acknowledgement to note that we are on here in the Haldeman Tract. That's the traditional territory of the Mutual, Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. And this land is part of the Dish with One Spoon Treaty between the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe peoples. And it symbolizes the agreement to share, protect our resources and not to engage in conflict. And I just want to say that having been working from home for the last, more than 2 years, it seems now, almost, I have been very appreciative of the fact that my home is located here and I have been able to benefit of this community. Next slide, thanks. So today what we want to do is have a quick background. I think Dan's offered us an interesting background to begin, but we'll go over quickly what's happened. We'll have a brief overview of the data collected through the survey, and then review the survey methodology, which I think probably a lot of people here are very interested in. The planning and the survey format, how we did the data collection and promotion, how we did the analysis and the disaggregation, action of the data, and then actions and next steps. And we'd like to invite you to ask questions throughout. So Dan will be making the presentation and then I'll monitor the chat, and or feel free just to interject as you please. But if you want to write stuff in the chat, then I can kind of direct Dan to respond to that. Okay, so next slide, our immigration partnership here in Waterloo region. Our vision is that immigrants reach their full potential and contribute to creating and sustaining a thriving, prosperous community for everyone. And so there's the link to our website. And so please fill out our partnership here. Next slide. So why is it important? Why is it important that we have an immigration partnership? As we mentioned, we're already working towards a community where everyone thrives and belongs. And so we really want to think of it as a kind of a mission of the whole community in terms of being a welcoming community and making immigrants feel comfortable. Second point, we want to understand the immigrant experience now and in the context of future population increases and growing newcomer arrival. And so this great idea of what's happening in terms of this is permanent resident arrivals. One of the things, and we can discuss this as well, is the partnership has been very focused on understanding the full diversity of newcomers to the community. As many of you may know, Waterloo region is home to 2 universities and a college, Laurier, Waterloo and Conestoga. We have a large number of international students in our community, and it's very important to understand the experience of temporary residents as well as permanent. Next slide. We're also, as I meant, growing diversity. We want to pay attention to experiences of racism. And again, this is an important component of recognizing the significance of a welcoming community, recognizing the kind of whole of mission responsibility for communities to pay attention to what's happening to members of their community who may be from different ethnocultural communities. And the survey helps us sort of get a handle on that as well. We're also wanting to know more about the experiences of immigrants. We need to understand how they are or are not being plugged into the economy effectively, and kind of understand this in light of current labour market shortages. And so really the survey allows us to get a better handle on some of those experiences as well. So you can find the resources for the survey here. And I think now I'll just hand it over.
Absolutely. I'm going to give you a very high level overview of the findings, because some of you have already looked at the summary report. Some of you were at a presentation where we focused on the survey findings last week. But for those who weren't able to make it there, just wanted to give a couple glimpses at some of the findings, and check out the webpage here with all of our reports and links there for more information. So we had 1,507 respondents, all immigrants, and all major categories of immigration, permanent residents as well as temporary residents, and different types of temporary residents, from international students, temporary workers, refugee claimants, etc. We made sure we wanted to hear from different areas within the Waterloo region as well as different groups. We didn't want to only look at people who had come more recently, or to only hear from people who had received settlement services. But what about people who aren't plugged in? What about people who have been here for quite a while and can look back over, 10, 20, 30 years and say, this is, where I've come, because that perspective is really important. We heard from a diverse group of about, on this graph, the blue is the individuals of white race, and then the other categories are what is often termed racialized. So 70% racialized individuals. Then diverse languages. 84% had a first language other than English. So only 16% grew up speaking English first, and 80 other first languages, and you can see a number of them here. Having said that, most people spoke English well or very well, but on the other hand, almost 10% spoke English only poorly or not at all. And so, one of the things that we're very aware of is that how do we respond to people who can't communicate easily in English? So some key themes that came up: immigrants. Can you see my my cursor on number 1? Okay, I will bring, there you, does that work? Okay, so so I can point where I'm talking. So immigrants positively contribute to life in Waterloo region. We wanted to make sure that we weren't just saying, oh, these are the problems, these are the challenges, but to provide that balanced perspective, because immigrants really make our community a lot richer, and they contribute a lot, whether it's through volunteering or donating, or whether it's being a small business owner or an employer and employing other people, recycling, giving blood, a whole host of ways. And so one of the really neat things was starting to see those stories. And that's where I think it really comes alive. So that was certainly something that we were intentional about, and we're really, we saw clearly that there is a lot of contribution by immigrants in the Waterloo region. Key concerns continue to be, the first time we did the survey 4 years ago, then 2 years ago, and now, key concerns continue to be finding employment, affordable housing, and connectedness or belonging. Those 3 areas are always in the top. Increased isolation experiences during the pandemic. The isolation was one of the things that made the largest increase over the last 2 years, and part most likely from the pandemic. And welcoming inclusion, how do we welcome individuals, was an important area of focus that came up in a number of areas. And I'll go into a couple stats on each of those. And then realizing that immigrants are diverse and various groups have more difficulties, so that it's not one average that immigrants feel this. But there are some groups that are doing quite well and some that are really struggling. And it became obvious how important it is to pull those pieces apart. So when we asked immigrants about key challenges, again, finding work, making friends or social connections, and finding affordable housing were their key concerns. And you can see in 2017, the top responses, 2019 and 2021. And so a number of various areas, but interesting to find those three still at the top, though finding work did drop. Said this was one of my top three concerns, dropped, possibly because of benefits and other programs during the pandemic. A number of similar suggested solutions: more affordable housing options, more better programs for immigrants to find work, and improving English skills, educating employers, and reducing racism and discrimination towards immigrants. So some complementary top items. About significant supports, having family support was really important, especially during the pandemic, where that increase, where we're locked down and people didn't have as much option to go and connect with their neighbors or other social circles. And so making friends was important, but that did decrease, arguably or potentially because of the pandemic, lockdowns and that sort of thing. Belonging to a religious group was also very important this year. In terms of religious groups, we had about 3/4 were part of a faith community. Many of those Christian, then Muslim, and other. We asked them what services they used, and in these general categories. And then this is the percentage that rated those services highly, excellent, very good, or good. And then the percent that rated those poor or acceptable. And so a variety of perspectives on some services are doing better than others. We asked them how they access services. And here I just want to draw your attention to this, why they might not have accessed services virtually. So 4% said services were not available virtually in their language, and therefore they couldn't. 2% didn't have the tools like internet access, a laptop, etc. And 6% were not comfortable accessing virtual services in general, familiarity with mode of service delivery. And I've pointed out before that these numbers are small as percentages, but when you consider that there's 100,000, more than 100,000 immigrants across Waterloo region, all of a sudden these numbers are quite significant during the pandemic. We asked about employment. Immigrant groups, is your current job commensurate with your skills or experience? Is it at the same level? So about half said it was at the same level as their skills or experience, but some groups, like these groups here, and especially down at the bottom here, were less likely to be in jobs that were at the same level as their skills or experience. When we asked them about employment services and were they helpful in finding employment, about 2/3 found them helpful. And the reasons that they gave for were often around the way services were oriented. They're not oriented to my category of immigrants or people like me, internationally trained professionals or temporary residents or international students. And so that mismatch, either in perception or reality of these services with different groups. Income, we asked, is your income sufficient for the needs of you and your family? 55%, but then some groups, especially these here, said, no, my income is not sufficient for the needs of myself and my family. Housing, 74% said my housing is affordable and suitable for me. So 3/4 say I'm in housing that's at least okay for me. But some of these groups were less likely to say that it was affordable and suitable, especially low income, recent refugees, those with poor settlement experience. We asked them about life satisfaction, and this is a stat that's used often by Stats Canada as an umbrella indicator of well-being. And so we asked it in the exact same way that Stats Canada uses it on the CCHS, the Canadian Community Health Survey, and a number of other surveys. On a scale of 0 to 10, how satisfied are you with your life right now? 0 being very dissatisfied, to 10. And we grouped the ones who rated it 8 to 10 as quite satisfied. So half of immigrants were quite satisfied with their life right now. 40% were somewhat satisfied. And then a little bit more than 10% were dissatisfied with their life right now. We asked them about their settlement experience. Looking back overall, how was your experience of settling and integrating in Waterloo region? So 3/4 said they had a positive settlement experience. It was either excellent or good. And then some groups were more likely to say they had a positive settlement experience, including a number of categories of refugees. And some were less likely to have a positive settlement experience. Francophones, people who are isolated, people in Cambridge with a disability, etc. Looking at sense of belonging, to what degree do you have a sense of belonging in Waterloo region? Survey respondents, that was the average. And then some groups were more likely to say they had a strong sense of belonging, and some were less likely to say they had a strong sense of belonging. For instance, people with a poor settlement experience, people who said my settlement experience was neutral or poor. That might be just people who said it was poor. I'm gonna have to double check that. As well as temporary work permit holders, international students who are also temporary work permit or temporary residents, etc. Isolation, as I had said, showed since the last time we did the survey in 2019. So jumping from 60% up to 76% this past year. And then when we look at welcoming, to asking them, to what degree is Waterloo region welcoming to immigrants? Again, on a scale from 0 to 10, with 0 being not at all welcoming to immigrants, and 10 being Waterloo region is very welcoming to immigrants. 50% felt that it was quite welcoming, 40% said it was somewhat welcoming, and 10% said, 11% said it's not very welcoming to immigrants. Again, we broke it down to those that were more likely to say that Waterloo region was quite welcoming to immigrants, and those who were less likely to say that Waterloo region is welcoming to immigrants. And we start to see some groups that come in these lists. And then lastly, discrimination. 1/4 of all survey respondents said that they had experienced discrimination in the past year. And then some groups were more likely to say that they experienced discrimination. Some of these, disability as an example, there might be multiple intersectionality of various characteristics where there might be discrimination. So it's not only discrimination due to their identity as an immigrant or as a newcomer or various aspects like that, but discrimination of some sort. So then when we start to see some of these groups that came up more frequently as having a more difficult time across multiple indicators and analysis methods. So
maybe Dan, just to interrupt, Kat has a question about how did you approach the issue of self-identifying skin color. Did the survey, do people identify as BIPOC, or did each question indicate specific racialized backgrounds in the question options?
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
we did it once, right?
We did it once, and we used the Stats Canada categories, which I'm not a fan of, but for comparability, that's what we decided to use. But we went, Margaret was on the evaluation committee, and we really grabbed, some other groupings I am a lot happier with. City of Kitchener did something that I think is similar, but it grouped things a lot more intuitively. But for now, we left it as the StatsCan population groups. They don't call it visible minority anymore, but population groups. So yes, we asked it once at the beginning, and it was self-identified. Choose all that apply.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to say thanks for that. This is Kat here from Quinte Local Immigration Partnership. And so just to clarify, you asked it once, and then you, with the other questions, you parsed out who answered the question and how they answered it, and then used that as your information. Yeah. Okay, thank you. And
we did that for a lot of the variables, because we wanted to really disaggregate the data to see how things, and so yeah, I'll give you a sense of how that happened as we get into the methodology.
Okay, great, thank you.
So yeah, this isn't an exhaustive list. I think that's important to note, because we continue to analyze additional groups as people have questions, and some, like I just pulled out the comparisons for all of the East African languages grouped together, and East African languages probably would have just made this list, or just on the borderline. So but it gives an idea of some of the places we can start, and it certainly is better than just saying this is the average. So any other questions about findings before I jump into the methodology? Okay, feel free to jump in if you have questions as we go.
Oh yeah, sorry, I just wanted to, took me a while to unmute.
Yep.
I was curious if you had, did you find like a significant larger student population in your survey compared to other regions or other surveys you've done?
So yeah, international students is an area that we've got a large population in Waterloo region, and 2015, really 15, 16, that number has shot way up, and it's been something that has been identified, excuse me, that the needs of international students is something that we need to do better as a community, especially in those transition moments, as a transition from international student to work permit, and work permit to permanent residency. Often as we see the rise of edu immigrants, using education as a pathway.
Right.
So they're very difficult to connect with, especially during the pandemic, when a lot might not be in Waterloo region, and might be studying from India, China, Nigeria, etc. So we didn't have as large a number of international students as we'd like, but we had more than we had last time. So what that means is that some of the stats show a more pronounced, issues with international students that we didn't see before, but some of that might be because we're hearing from more of them. As a proportion of all of our respondents. So it's certainly something we need to pull apart, and we've wanted to do a focus group or digging deeper, maybe with another survey just for international students, just to pull that apart a little bit more.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, it's an. I don't think we've plumbed the depths of what we need to explore with that.
Okay. Thanks.
So in terms of planning and survey format, I'll start at the beginning and kind of work through temporally, how we went about this, then go to data collection, then, what we did with the data, then sharing it. So in terms of the format, it was a broad survey trying to get a snapshot of immigrant experience as perceived by immigrants across a wide variety of topics, as you saw with the overview of the findings. And because we wanted it to provide a basic understanding for many partners, initiative purposes, so we went for breadth in many areas, more so than depth. And so we didn't ask as many why questions as I'd love to. I think that's where we need to dig into some of the other modes of research, like focus groups and interviews, and kind of focusing in to ask those why questions. So this gives us some of the broad categories, and by disaggregating the data, we can pull it apart a little bit more, add a little bit of those whys, but we need to continually be asking for. Sometimes a survey like this isn't the place for that, because it does tend to go more for breadth. In terms of who we heard from, in 2017, we heard from about 200 immigrants. 2 years later, we heard from 1,100, and this year we heard from just over 1,500 immigrants. And that allowed us to disaggregate the data a lot better than if we had 200. It meant that we could, slice and dice it and still have, 50, 90, 100 in that subgroup. So then this involvement of newcomers, that was something that was really critical for us as we went through this, like all through the process. So we had an advisory committee of our council, and that group was providing guidance on, as I mentioned, the questions, and that involved a number of immigrants, and we tried to make sure that there are immigrants on all of our committees, that it's at least a third of all of our members. Then immigrant feedback from previous surveys. Every year I collect probably closer to 10 pages of dense notes about changes for next time, and comments that someone made about they were confused by this, or suggesting different wording, and all trying to get build on other research by IRCC, Stats Canada, or other immigration partnerships, and how those things are worded. And so getting that feedback and continuously feeding it back in, and tweaking those questions so that we improve the clarity, the focus, that sort of thing, has been so important, and involving immigrants all through that. Feedback from partners, again, so critical, especially because they're working with immigrants every day, and honing our wording, what we're asking, why we're asking it. And then we also ask them to ask their clients. So, testing out some of the questions. And then pilot surveying the tool, some at partner organizations and some with individuals that we knew. And this is always something you want to pilot it with as many people as possible, while not too much of people, so that they don't end up filling out the actual survey. So yeah, it's something that we I think doing it multiple years allows us to pilot that same question multiple times, and over time we slowly improve it. In terms of the overall format, we, because of the pandemic and there wasn't much in-person connection back in June, it was at the height of 3, I think, we made the decision to make it online, but always offering multiple alternate methods, email, phone, going over it with someone, if that was an issue. No one took us up on that. And so partly that is, I think people were online for about a year by that point, and more people were familiar with these options. But that's certainly not all of it. Some of it is that we like these other methods strong enough, and that's certainly a limitation of this. The main survey, previously we had about 2/3 that were online and 1/3 that was in person at grocery stores and festivals and that sort of thing. So it was a significant shift to doing it online. And I think multi approach is always stronger. So our main survey was 44 questions. And then we had a shorter survey that we translated that had about 16 questions in languages. And we estimated the longer one would take about 10 to 15 minutes and the shorter one take about 2 to 4 minutes. Ideally, if we were in person, I would love to have the short one being extremely short, kind of one side of one page, just maybe 8 to 10 questions. But it's always finding that balance between, breadth and making it as easy as possible for people. In terms of translation, we translated it into these 10 different languages. They were identified as top languages for translation in some work that we had done previously, based on requests for translation, top languages where people don't know English or French. So about 3/4 of the surveys were filled out in English, and then 1/4 in these other languages. Translation was really important because for a couple of reasons. It broadens the scope of who we're listening to. It clearly says to a more diverse group of people that they're included. It says this is for you. And it also makes it more the norm across the community. When others are doing surveys, the more we can be translating, the more others will see, oh, everyone's translating their surveys. Maybe I should too. And so I think that's really in terms of making general change as an immigration partnership. In terms of how that went, the translation wasn't really difficult. We used Check Market, and it made it quite simple, where you put the surveys in English, you export a Excel file with all of the questions and all of the options, and then hand that to your translators, and they just translate each cell in their language, and then they get that back to you without changing the formatting. You upload it, and you've got all the different languages. So it's actually quite simple, except for a couple caveats. And the caveat is that troubleshooting languages is difficult, especially languages that go right to left. It's especially tricky when you get right to left languages and you've got HTML code in between. It's useful to have mostly closed-ended questions, but needing some translation responses if you have open-ended questions, so that having that balance but predominantly closed-ended is way easier. And it gets confusing. You need a system where there's a number of steps to clean the data, sorting what needs to go where, translating different languages through different connections, because sometimes one organization, one translator can't do all the languages. And even if you have a professional translation company, it's useful to have people who can double check different languages. Back that, this wasn't perfect, not anything that was blatantly incorrect, but tweaking. And it's not often a black and white thing. Chris, you had a question?
Yeah, sorry, you pretty much answered it. I was just curious about the troubles of translating, because I noticed in the limitations you mentioned it briefly about possible misunderstandings when translating questions, and just the ways in which you mitigate that. It pretty much mentioned all the ways to best at least try to mitigate those issues.
And
yeah, working with service providers, I think, is a great way to do it, that you said, and obviously piloting questions over a few years helps.
Yeah, weed out some of that. Part of that difficulty is that a lot of languages have different dialects, and so it might work in this dialect and not so much in this. And realism, we can't translate into every, we had 8 first languages, and within that we might have a number of dialects. The shorter we made our translated survey, the more languages we could translate into. So there's always those trade-offs, and how do we find that balance? Kat, did you have a question?
Yeah, it was surrounding the same issue, translation. Did you find that extremely costly? I'm just wondering about that, because for us, it's one of those things that it's like, wow, we have to spend a lot of money on that, just on a practical end.
Yeah. I don't have the figures. It was probably, well, this year it was the most costly part of the survey for us. In the past time, we hired some people who were surveyors who would go out in person to festivals and their communities and outside of grocery stores. And so we hired them, and I think that was the larger expense that time. But in a virtual sense, it's a cost. I can't remember if you email me, I can give you some ballparks.
Great, thanks.
So back to format stuff, clear language. Yeah, not much to say, except it's so important, but it's so hard. We want to pull together complex things. We often want to use things that are relevant, wording that's relevant to other, national surveys or other surveys that other people have done. We want to connect it to efforts that the community is talking about in clear language, especially clear language for people who are just learning English. So it's difficult, but so important. And having that second, third pair of eyes is really, really key. Contributing partners. This year, we invited individual partner organizations the opportunity to become contributing partners and to add 3 to 5 questions to the survey that are only answered by the respondents that are referred through their organization. So they get a specific link that they can share with their clients, their folks that are involved with their organization. And then it would enable them to gather data specifically on the things that are relevant for them, maybe getting participant feedback on their organization or program, specific needs, new ideas, that sort of thing. And then we could tie I'd give them a summary of the responses for their clients, and could tie the unique questions that they asked to the broader survey responses, and use the demographic way and give those organizations this high-level summary of their data results, as long as we have a sufficient sample size. And our key request is that they commit to getting at least 100 responses, so that the responses, the analysis is meaningful enough, and so that it becomes a mutual benefit. to us and the individual organizations. So we had several partners express interest, but for a variety of reasons, they weren't at a point in time when they could do that. And so we had one contributing party. They found it really useful. And so it's, I think, a neat way where we can use technology to make it really simple to enable individual organizations to get the information they need, and do it in a way that everyone wins. It's a win-win-win.
There's a question from Magla.
Yes, thank you. Hi, Dan. Which survey tool did you use to let you visual specific questions for your partners' clients?
Yep.
Let's say you work with employment services or like your settlement supports. They ask specific questions to their clients, and I don't know which kind of tool.
Yeah, absolutely. We used Checkmarket, but I suspect most survey software would allow you to do that. All I did was I created the main survey, and then I made it their questions and then gave them that link, so that when the results were exported, then they were all in the exact same format. There were just these extra questions for the partner organization. And so I did all of my analysis in Excel. It just made it easier, given all the complexities of cleaning the data and the nuances. Maybe if I had really refined the questions and options quite a bit, then it wouldn't. I could use something like SPSS or some statistical software, but for our purposes, I found it made a lot more sense to use just something simple like as Excel. So Checkmarket allowed me to just make 2 duplicate copies, export it, and it just had a couple of extra columns.
So you kind of give them the Excel, the raw data, or some kind of clean data, and then they use that data for their reporting, or did you create specific reporting chart?
Yeah, I created a specific charts and bullet points for them, so that it was as easy as possible for them to do that. And it wasn't all that difficult because I was disaggregating 26 different groups anyway. And so this was just one more group that I could analyze all the questions for.
Yeah, perfect. And I have one more question from before. You mentioned you had short and long versions of the survey. How did you decide on number of questions? And like, how do you think people are convinced to go to the longer version? Like, how many longer version responses did you get?
Yeah, so the English was only available in the full version, full length version. And then the translated were the only short versions. And so that was the distinction. If they needed something other than English, it was the short. But we tried to, as much as possible, to encourage people to go to the English because it was the full length. And yeah, we didn't get a lot of feedback saying this is way too long. There were some people who quit partway through. But there's a surprising amount of commitment to the end of a reasonably long survey. So I was really surprised and impressed over the last couple times we've done this survey, the commitment that people have to providing this information. I think part of that is upfront sharing what we're going to use it for and why, so that people can say, yeah, that's what I want to contribute to, and this is why I'm doing it. You know, yes, there's an incentive. But the real reason is I believe in this. So at least for as many people as possible. So yeah, that's how we divided the long and the short version.
Thank you.
So then asking respondents if they're interested in future research. This was a question at the end, and I'm really glad that we did. We asked, are you interested in sharing your thoughts in the future by participating in other surveys or research by the Immigration Partnership? And we ended up getting over 500 immigrants that shared their name and email address with us. And so it was collected in a separate follow-up form, so it couldn't be connected to their survey answers. It took them to a link, and they then could put that completely separate. But it'll really help us in promoting the survey in 2 years. So we do this every 2 years. We'll already have 500 people that are interested in participating, and all we have to do is send out one email. That saves a ton of promotion in the future. And so it was certainly really useful in that respect, but also for any specific follow-up research that we're doing, focus groups, interviews, digging deeper. We analyzed the responses of those that said that, yes, I'm interested in participating in future research. And we compared it to all survey respondents and found that their responses across the questions were not very different from the general respondents. And so, from that we can see, oh yeah, this is a subgroup, a reasonably representative, not in a statistical sense, a reasonably representative sample of the of all of our 1,500 responses. So that was
sorry, just Dan, to interject. Erica had just commented that they've done this at the library with great success, maintain interest in feedback. And just also to mention, I mean, there was also a lot of promotion of the survey using social media, Twitter and so on, and lots of people were helpful in kind of retweeting those messages out there. And also, I don't know if this is a relevant point to bring it up, but on our data and evaluation committee, we have commented on all of our partners at the Immigration Partnership, also thinking about how data they collect might also increase on newcomers. And it made me think of that with the library, because we said to our library partner who's on the partnership, for example, when you have new members join, do you ask them about their, do you give them an option to indicate if they're a newcomer immigrant to the region? And if so, their data collection helps us understand, combined with all the rest of us, how effectively all of these services are managing to capture the newcomer population in the region. So I just wanted to bring that up because we mentioned there, kind of reminded me about
creating a community-wide system of data collection. So it's not just one survey, it's the community saying, how do we learn more? How do we listen more? And that's through multiple methods. And some of it might be connected and some of it might not be directly connected. It's always easier when it's connected, as David mentioned, it's everything together in some ways, and certainly people have a hesitancy around that, but it also is valuable for our learning. So that is, how do we create that system?
And I don't know, it's probably somewhat different for IRCC. I suppose in our survey, we asked people effectively, do you want to be part of a list server? Like we'll just send you information about what we're doing. Is that right, Dan?
Yeah, it's a completely separate list. But
and then the idea of having all of our partners actually collect their own data, part of the thinking about that was that we can kind of triangulate to understand how effectively the community is reaching out, how effectively the newcomer population is using their services, but also it means that the library, when they see the results of this is how many new immigrants came to the region, they can look at their own data and say, are we effectively capturing, are we effectively servicing this population? Hopefully there'll be some of that, a bit more of an integrated approach to gathering data on this matter across the whole community.
Yep, absolutely.
And I don't know if you have any answers directly for anybody has. David, if I don't know what to, it is a problem if people feel like they don't want to give out too much information.
Yeah, and I agree. I think we're in a different situation than than you in communities that are closer to them, because we do have files on people and they would have greater hesitancy with us. So yeah, that's kind of why we at this point are avoiding it, despite seeing the great value in doing that in terms of pulling people into focus groups and telling us more about some of their experience. But maybe there's ways we can tap into your list as you know, in collaboration as time goes by.
Yeah,
absolutely, and sharing and promoting. So the next piece is around research ethics, and research ethics isn't something that we were explicit about. And this is one area that I'd like to have some specific conversations around next time we do the survey. So we didn't go through a formal ethics review process, but our approach to research has and always will be one where ethics principles are front and center. So things like informed consent and having all the key elements of a consent form in clear language at the beginning of the survey, or confidentiality and things like ensuring that any personally identifying items are filtered out of any shared. So, you know, going through several times and saying, is there anything that could identify an individual? You know, some people left their email addresses and in the comment fields, and yeah, we can't just blindly just include those in a list of qualitative comments, but really going through one by one. Or data protection and only collecting information that's relevant. And reporting participants, another key ethics principle, making virtually all questions optional in the survey. And ethics also has to do with how we share the findings. So not just focusing on problems, but giving that balanced perspective of the challenges and the amazing assets and capacities of immigrants. So it's not just about what we do and how we collect the data, but then what do we do with it afterwards? That's research ethics as well. So those are all things that we did but perhaps next year it would be great to do it more explicitly, at least periodically. So in terms of data collection, our goal was 1,500 responses, and we got just over that at 1,507. We defined immigrants quite broadly. Anyone who was born outside of Canada and now lives, has a connection to our region. Our data collection period was originally 3 weeks in June, and then we extended it by a week so we could get a few more people in, partners who said, oh, I will be meeting with this group. I can do it if we had another couple days. So using multiple methods is so critical to promotion. We didn't just hear from immigrants that use settlement services. So this year, 43% of survey respondents hadn't recently used settlement services specifically, and 33% hadn't recently used services that are often more unique to the initial settlement period. So settlement services, English language learning, interpretation, translation, those types of things. So really trying to make sure we had, you know, at least a third to a half of people who weren't accessing those settlement services. So in terms of multiple methods to reach folks, partners were so critical, especially during the pandemic when we didn't have those direct contacts with people. It was all through partners, or a lot of it. Social media, we use Google ads, Facebook ads, as well as ethnic radio ads. We had some posts and in-person settings where we put the posters and shared information. And then some targeted outreach. So, you know, how can we reach this group or that group? In terms of kind of what we learned from that over the last couple of years, lots of reminders. making personal requests and one-on-one conversations. You know, hey, Joe, I know you work with a lot of folks in this context. You know, is there anything that you could, you know, connect with them about this survey? And just one-on-one takes a lot of legwork, but it's so useful. One, for building those continued relationships, as well as for actually getting the word out there. Kat.
Hi, me again. Yeah, I just had a question about, did you actually use any paper surveys at any point? Did you find that anyone was requesting that? Just wondering if that came up as an issue.
Yeah, so this year, last year we did, because we were delivering it in a number of in-person settings. But this year we didn't specifically print a whole bunch and hand them out because of where we were in the pandemic. And so, and we didn't get anyone requesting, even though we said on our website when we shared it with people that, you know, let us know if online doesn't work for you and you want to look at any alternate methods. We're open. So I think we did miss some, and it would skew the results some. But we looked at, we asked people how they heard about us, and so we looked at how the responses were different for the people who heard about it through a poster versus heard about it through, you know, getting it through an electronic link. And there were some differences, not dramatic differences, in terms of the respondents that the responses of the participants who saw it through a poster versus other means. So it's something that in future years, when there's no pandemic, here's hoping that we will again have paper, but for this year we didn't, and we still got a really good response, but I think it would have been that much stronger if we could have reached people through other means as well.
Thanks.
We had $200 prepaid credit card plus $300 gift certificates to local immigrant-owned restaurants, plus $10 Tim Hortons gift certificates. So wanting to make it significant enough that it would make someone's day and be an incentive, but not too much that it was awkward or something like that. Last time when we did in-person surveys, several people noted that some incentives for each in-person survey filled out would be really valuable. Online survey, a draw seemed to work really well and enabled us to have some, really, it would make their day to get a $200 prepaid credit card or a $100 gift certificate, but it was kind of doable for us. And so a draw worked well. But I'm not certain how much this impacted whether people filled it out. And I'd love to dig into this a little further in the future. It was kind of a gut, but I don't have data, this made a difference for this many people or not. So then the last thing in terms of data collection that I think is really important is that we developed response targets. So we looked at for, I think it was like 36 or 40 different, I think it was a bit more than 40 different groups. What was the proportion of immigrants in those populations? So what was the proportion of immigrants in, what proportion of immigrants lived in Cambridge versus Waterloo versus Kitchener are different cities, and in rural? What about, what's the proportion of the proportion of immigrants in LGBTQ population, or men, women, different population, 40 different targets. And so then we established that looking at census data and other stats that we could find. to give us a target for that group. Then we could, during the survey, several times, we would, pretty much every week, we'd check and see, so what's the proportion for each of those groups? So we could see where we were not reaching a proportional number of people. And then we could do further outreach and promotion in those communities. So that became a really useful way to ensure that, as I point out, that this data is not a representative sample, but our diverse and targeted promotion made it the results as representative as possible. So not representative in a statistical sense, but as representative as possible. And so that target motion was really important, and checking all through the survey response. So then, oh, Sandra, you had a question?
Thanks, yes. We similarly had an approach that's representative sample or random sampling. I was just wondering if you had any community partners who like publicly questioned the validity of the results because it wasn't a population sample. Like,
we haven't heard that yet.
okay.
No. And I think part of it is that we're very clear this is not a representative sample. It's not a statistical sample, and it is what it is. We're not trying to make it out to be something it's not. And I think that goes a long way. It's when we make it sound like something it's not. So I think that helps, but no, we haven't heard that from folks yet, though it's a limitation, absolutely.
Thanks for that. And there's no way to get past it though if we're doing local applied research.
Not with the resources that we have.
Yeah.
You know, we do some where, like, we partnered with the University of Waterloo in a survey that they do every year. And for this year, we didn't do it, but normally we purchase a page of questions to get a representative sample public perceptions of immigration across a couple different questions. And so that's one way where we can do that, that is statistically representative, but with something like this, that's not what we're trying to do.
Yeah, thanks.
So then this just highlights, you know, what we estimate of who we reached. And so it does vary, and these are, you know, based on broad estimates. You know, first two, the estimate of temporary residents is very rough, and so these need to be taken with that limitation in mind. But generally, starting to get a noticeable percentage. So yeah, these were the populations that we had specific targets for, and the bolded ones are the didn't hit our targets. So the vast majority, we did hit our targets, but there were a number we didn't. The trying to think what the asterisk was for. I'm gonna have to get back to you on that one. I can't recall. It was, oh, I remember. It was, so all of these categories are, we looked at all immigrants, but the ones with asterisks beside them, they were an average between the proportion in the immigrant population in general and the proportion among recent immigrants specifically, because these were areas where there's been a significant shift over, you know, that recent immigrants are distinct longer-term immigrants in their demographic makeup, And so we had the data in those cases to kind of take an average of those two. So just making it a little bit more specific. David, we can get around. Oh, I think I missed a comment in the.
I'm just saying on ours, we have the advantage of having everybody's email address, so we can get pretty easy to get representation that way when you've got 800,000 email addresses. But and so that's some of the advantage, and what we can bring to the table is that comparison against surveys that are done locally that don't have that advantage, just to sort of see if anything seems off as you have results that don't seem comparable.
And that brings up an excellent point. Another reason why it's so important for us to use similar questions whenever possible, so that we can, that becomes a check, not just on that question, but it starts to give a general sense that these things in general are not that much different, or they're very different. And that's
absolutely.
You had, I think in the details you've got, Dan, that for the highlighted categories, you had it was underrepresented in terms of the amount of data collected, right? I'm not sure what the asterisk is there.
Yeah, the asterisk was kind of averaging the proportion in the total immigrant population and the recent immigrant population.
Right.
So then data analysis. As I've said before, we found disaggregating the data really critical to understand differences within a group, because averages can really honestly be misleading because they don't speak for everyone and they obscure distinct differences. So to do this, we use two methods. So the first was a resilience vulnerability index, and it's not a broadly tested or validated index, but simply created using 10 of the questions from the survey. And the intent was to get a quick glance at which groups corresponded to increased resilience or increased vulnerability, so we could dig deeper with further analysis. So I took these questions, these topic areas, and these questions from our existing survey. I standardized the scoring for the responses to each of those questions. And these questions kind of match up to kind of how we structure our immigration partnership. So settling, working, belonging, and then an overall umbrella indicator. And so then average score, a resilience vulnerability index score for each individual. So then we get a score for each individual that describes whether they're more or less likely to be more vulnerable or resilient to shocks or challenges in their life. So what, and I know you can't read this, but we've got the 10 different domains here across the top, and then the average score here. And then these were every single question we asked in the survey. So I think we had 270 elements that we could look at for each of these 10 domains. And so for a question about immigration, different languages, age, etc. And so this allowed us to then identify those hotspots in red, or where things are going well in green. And some of these are grayed out because the sample size was too small. We tried to be respectful of that and how that skews the data. So with that then, we could identify some populations to disaggregate the data. So we could then say, these are 26 different groups that either through this index or from suggestions from the research advisory group or the community partners and others, we could say, let's disaggregate all of our data according to these groups and see how their experiences are different. And so, again, not an exhaustive list, but a couple of key limitations for this disaggregation. Small sample sizes is a key one. The smaller you get, the less you can say about it. And being clear that they need to be interpreted with caution, not reporting anything less than 5 respondents, reporting with caution, or only saying general things about things with less than 20 people. We didn't have rigorous statistical analysis with confidence intervals and the like, but we tried as possible to use those same principles with simpler tools like Excel and simple qualitative analysis. And then another limitation that was suggested, it's very true, is that some groups or individuals may understand specific words or concepts differently: belonging, isolation, discrimination, expectations of what is excellent service delivery. And obviously that could impact the findings. So this really is a first go at digging deeper. Then once our plan is to create some population profiles on some of these groups that in particular stand out, so that we can have further conversations about, so let's talk about temporary work permit holders. Let's look at the data, summarize it in a quick profile, and let's have a community conversation about, what do we need to do better? Where are those pinch points, and do we need to address? And then my last piece is around data sharing and next steps, and trying to get through this so we've got a little bit more time at the end. Before I get to that, Chris, you had a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, you mentioned SPSS before. Do you see any added value in using SPSS? Is there anything that you couldn't do in Excel that you feel could be valuable using a larger software, doing more inferential statistical analysis?
Absolutely. So part of it is my skill set, and I am very comfortable in Excel. And the beauty of that is that you can, I can do a lot of stuff in Excel, and sort and do this analysis and then make a copy of it and do that. But the risk is that to hammer everything to nail, and oh, it has to be Excel. So I would love to, next time I made a note to partner with master's PhD student who can look at, so what is SPSS or something similar best for, and what is Excel best for? And so that's something that I want to dig deeper in. But one of the things that I've talked with some of our local epidemiologists and data people, and in the end, we keep coming back to Excel as our primary analysis tool because the data is often so varied, and it's not a straightforward yes, no. Often it's, well, people interpreted it this way. And what about this group? In the open-ended comments, they said, I'm this. Or because people don't like immigration category. A lot of people don't know what their immigration category was. They don't think in those terms. People who work immigration sector think in those terms. We think about GARs and PSRs. They don't think about those. I'm a Canadian citizen, and yes, I was born in another country. End of story. Or it might have been 30 years ago. So some of those things make it a little bit fuzzier to use a really rigid analysis tool, but to the degree that we can use that tool and can make it a bit more rigid, it can give us such richer data. So it's finding that balance. And I don't think we got that balance perfect, but we're learning as we go.
Yeah, because I was that master's student who was hired to do SPSS analysis for a project, and they didn't have to pay me very much. So you can do it for sure.
Absolutely.
We should mention we had some assistance, Dan, and this might be something that other LIPs might be interested in. Yeah. We worked with Laurier. Laurier had actually an international student work experience program, and we hired a student through that on doing some of this analysis. And so it might be an opportunity for other groups to reach out to local colleges and educational institutions for perhaps opportunities like that.
Absolutely. That's really helpful. And the more we can make those connections, the stronger it'll be, both for the post-secondary institutions. It strengthens their research to make it practical, make it connected to what people are grappling with, and it makes our research way stronger, farther. So data sharing and next steps. So important to share the information back, because if we collect really great data and we analyze it well, but we don't share them, then it's, we might as well not have done it in the first place. It's just as wasteful. So sharing what we learned is just as critical as any of the other steps, arguably, well, it's just as useful anyway. So first of all, sharing it back with participants. So using the email addresses we gathered, but also social media in the ways that we shared it about the survey to share our findings that way. And then with other stakeholders, people who can use the data, people who are invested, and then also broader community decision makers and others, and realizing, that each of these different groups have different information needs and require us to share it in multiple ways. And often it does take legwork. It does take connecting with lots of different people. So we created our summary report, and for those who want to dig a bit deeper, it's about 50 pages, and it has kind of a spectrum of a whole bunch of different aspects of it. But then we also have these presentations, and one of the benefits of the pandemic and everyone going virtual is that it's a little bit easier to have, instead of meeting with each individual group, and 2 or 3 people from each group might be particularly interested, we can have one presentation that everyone can come to. So we had one in December for our local partners, one in the evening in last week for general public and people who couldn't come during the day, and then one at the this one looking at methodology. So then discussions, lots of discussions, because it's in discussing what does this mean that I think is the most productive. And then we want to create some brief profiles like this. So just looking at immigrants living in Cambridge, and what are some of those highlights of key indicators, and how are people different, immigrants different in Cambridge versus general immigrants in Waterloo region, and then highlighting some key insights. And this is like a 3-pager. But we want to make it for different populations and some topics. So folks who are interested in housing can run with the housing piece. And then lots of one-on-one conversations where we can say, so what does this mean? What information do you need, going through the data to try and parse it out one-on-one with someone. And then the next steps, I don't have a lot of detail on what it is at this stage, because that's the stage we're in. We continue to explore where we can influence community awareness and collective action, working individually with partners and groups, engaging municipalities in their priority setting, their budget processes, and we've done some of that, and we'll continue to do that both at a staff level and a politician level. And then continuing to share what we heard broadly, and social media, website, with our partners, etc. So then, lastly, go to the website if you want to learn anything more. We'll be putting future information up there, so check back. Here is where we keep our other research, this link. And if you're wanting to keep up to date with us on a weekly basis, we put out a weekly digest with information about programs and research and stuff that's coming up. And you can subscribe there and contact me if you've got any questions at all. So I'll just go back to that. So yeah, that's all I had. We've just got a couple minutes, and I don't know if there's any other questions.
Just to let you know, I think David said he had to leave early, but we'll follow up with some questions on disaggregation. But yeah. Okay. Great, and Araf has to leave as well. So maybe it looks as if people need to shoot off to their next meeting. I should probably, maybe I'll just thank everyone. Thank you very much to Dan for making this presentation, and thank you to all of you for joining us. As we said, I think, Dan, we're going to make the recording available so others can follow up, and don't hesitate to reach out if you have further questions. We'd be really interested to get your insights, and we look forward to hearing about research that you undertake in your region, and we'll be very interested to look at your results as well. So probably, I think it looks as if people are heading off, and it's, again, we're really grateful. Thank you, Dan. Thanks everyone for tuning in. And do we have another presentation, Dan?
No other presentation website, and connect with me if you've got anything else.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks so much. Hey, Tara.